The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal spires of Nexus Prime as Ambassador So-Jin Park walked through the corridors of the Interstellar Council headquarters. Her footsteps echoed against the polished floors that reflected the faces of countless alien species who had walked these halls before her. Today felt different, though. The usual buzz of diplomatic chatter seemed quieter, more tense. So-Jin had been representing humanity for 3 years now, ever since Earth had been granted provisional membership in the Council. It was a trial period that most species received when they first joined the galactic community, but humanity's trial had been longer and more difficult than most. Many Council members still saw humans as primitive newcomers who had stumbled into space travel by accident rather than earned their place through wisdom. The communication device on her wrist buzzed with an urgent message. Council leader Vorthak wanted to see her immediately in the main chamber. So-Jin felt her stomach tighten. Emergency meetings were never good news, especially when they came without warning. She made her way to the massive central chamber where the Council held its most important sessions. The room was designed to accommodate dozens of different species, with varying atmospheric needs and physical requirements. Floating platforms hung at different heights for flying species, while ground-level areas were divided into sections for different environmental needs. Council leader Vorthak stood at the center of the room, his reptilian form towering over most other beings present. His scales gleamed dark green under the chamber lights, and his yellow eyes fixed on So-Jin as she approached. Around him stood representatives from several major council species, their expressions unreadable but clearly serious. Ambassador Park, Vorthak's voice rumbled through the chamber's translation system. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. So-Jin bowed slightly, following diplomatic protocol. I am at the Council's service, Leader Vorthak. How may humanity assist? A murmur ran through the assembled aliens. Ambassador Quilneth, a crystalline being whose body refracted light into rainbow patterns, stepped forward. Her voice chimed like wind through crystal caves when she spoke. 3 days ago, our patrol vessels captured something unprecedented. A Vorkath! The words hit So-Jin like a physical blow. Every species in known space had heard of the Vorkath. They were legends of terror. Ancient creatures that appeared without warning to destroy entire settlements. No one knew where they came from or why they attacked. They were simply death-given form, unstoppable forces of nature that could tear through the strongest defenses. A living Vorkath? So-Jin asked, unable to hide her shock. Very much alive, Vorthak confirmed, and very angry. We have it contained in our maximum security facility, but the containment is temporary at best. Our best estimates give us perhaps 72 hours before it breaks free. So-Jin looked around the chamber, seeing fear in the faces of beings from species far older and more advanced than humanity. What does this have to do with Earth's membership application? Ambassador Quilneth's crystalline form shifted colors, displaying what So-Jin had learned was equivalent to a cold smile. Everything. The Council has decided to offer humanity a choice. You have 72 hours to extract useful information from the creature. If you succeed, your species will be granted full Council membership immediately. And if we fail, your application will be permanently rejected, Vorthak stated flatly. Humanity will be asked to leave Council space and return to your home system. You will be classified as too primitive for galactic society. So-Jin felt the weight of her entire species' future settling on her shoulders. Around the chamber, she could see the expectant faces of alien diplomats. Some looked sympathetic, but most seemed to be waiting for humanity to decline the impossible task. Why us? She asked. Surely species with thousands of years more experience would be better suited for this. A new voice spoke from the chamber's upper levels. Ambassador Thorn, representing the insectoid Klaxi, buzzed his words through the translation system. 6 different species have already tried. The creature killed 3 researchers from the hegemony worlds in under 10 minutes. A team from the Crystalline Collective lasted barely longer. Even our most advanced xenobiologists cannot approach it without being attacked. The beast appears to have intelligence, added another representative, but it seems driven by pure rage. It attacks anything that comes near, regardless of peaceful intentions or defensive measures. So Jin processed this information carefully. The Council was essentially asking humanity to succeed where their most advanced civilizations had failed. It was clearly intended as an impossible test, designed to give them an excuse to reject human membership permanently. But there was something else at play here. She had studied galactic politics long enough to recognize the underlying currents. Many council members resented having to consider humanity for membership at all. They saw humans as upstarts who had advanced too quickly, who lacked the proper respect for established galactic order. This was their chance to be rid of the human problem once and for all. "I need to consult with my team," Sojin said carefully. "Of course," Vorthak replied. "But remember, the clock is already ticking. Every hour you delay is one less hour before the creature escapes and potentially kills everyone in the facility." Sojin left the chamber with her mind racing. She made her way back to the human embassy section of the station, where her small staff was already waiting. Word had somehow reached them about the emergency meeting. Tae-hyun Lee, her security specialist, looked up from a data pad as she entered. His usually calm expression showed concern. "The rumors are true, then? They actually caught one of those things?" "Unfortunately, yes," Sojin replied, sinking into her chair. "And they want us to somehow communicate with it in less than 3 days." Daewon Kim, their xenobiologist, had been quietly reviewing files in the corner. He was a thin man with intense eyes who had spent most of his career studying the galaxy's most dangerous life forms. "I want to volunteer," he said simply. The room fell silent. Tae-hyun stared at him in disbelief. "Daewon, you just heard what happened to the other research teams. This isn't some exotic but harmless creature. This thing is a killing machine." "That's exactly why I need to try," Daewon replied, standing up and moving to the room's central display. He activated a holographic projection, showing what little data existed about Vorkath encounters. "Look at these attack patterns. Look at the timing. Everyone who has approached these creatures has treated them as monsters to be contained or controlled." "Because that's what they are," Tae-hyun protested. "Are they?" Daewon asked. "Or are they something else that we just don't understand yet?" Sojin watched the exchange, knowing that humanity's future might depend on this decision. The smart choice would be to decline the Council's challenge and accept humanity's exclusion from galactic society. Earth could continue developing on its own, maybe try again for Council membership in a few centuries. But something in Daewon's expression gave her hope. He had that look he got when he was seeing patterns that others missed, when his mind was working through possibilities that seemed impossible to everyone else. "If you're wrong about this," she said quietly, "you'll die, and humanity will be exiled from the galaxy." Daewon nodded solemnly. "If I'm right, we might learn something that changes everything, not just for us, but for every species in the Council." The decision hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of an entire civilization's destiny. The maximum security facility on Nexus Prime was located 3 miles underground, carved into solid rock and surrounded by layer after layer of defensive systems. Daewon Kim followed the security escort through corridors that seemed to grow darker and more oppressive with each level they descended. The walls here were thick metal plates covered with warning symbols from dozens of different alien languages. "Last chance to change your mind." "Human," growled the facility commander, a massive bear-like creature from the Ursak Coalition. His fur was gray with age, and deep scars crossed his snout from decades of dealing with dangerous specimens. "I have seen many brave researchers go down to that containment level. Most do not come back up the same way they went down." Daewon adjusted the recording equipment on his belt and checked his datapad one more time. "I understand the risks, Commander Borak, but someone has to try a different approach." The elevator descended for what felt like an eternity. When the doors finally opened, Daewon stepped into a chamber that made him feel very small. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, supported by massive pillars that hummed with energy. At the center of the room, surrounded by a shimmering barrier field, was the most terrifying sight he had ever witnessed. The Vorkath was even larger than the reports had suggested. It stood 15 feet tall on powerful legs that ended in claws capable of tearing through starship armor. Its body was covered in scales that seemed to absorb light, making it appear as a living shadow with burning eyes. Those eyes were what struck Daewon most forcefully. They were not the mindless orbs of a simple predator, but the intelligent gaze of something that had seen too much and remembered everything. The creature was pacing back and forth within its containment field, moving with fluid grace despite its massive size. Every few moments it would pause to rake its claws against the energy barrier, sending sparks cascading to the floor. The sound was like metal being torn apart, and it echoed through the chamber with bone-chilling intensity. The previous research teams tried to approach it directly, Commander Borak explained, his voice barely above a whisper, despite the thick walls separating them from the creature. The hegemony scientists used stun weapons and force fields. The crystalline collective attempted telepathic contact. The Klaxi tried chemical sedation. All failed within minutes. Daewon studied the creature's movement patterns, noting how it seemed to pause at certain points in its pacing. What exactly happened to the research teams? The lucky ones fled in terror before the creature could react, Borak replied. The unlucky ones froze when they saw it up close. Those are the ones who did not survive. The creature seemed to sense their fear and attacked with incredible speed. The observation deck where they stood was protected by multiple barrier fields and armed guards. But Daewon could still feel the presence of the Vorkath like a weight pressing down on his mind. Every instinct told him to run, to get as far away from this thing as possible. But he forced himself to remain calm and continue observing. I need to go down there, he said quietly. Commander Borak's ears flattened against his skull. That is suicide, human. You cannot possibly survive direct contact with that creature. Maybe, Daewon admitted, but I need to try something different. Something no one else has attempted. The security preparations took another hour. Daewon was fitted with emergency teleportation beacons that would instantly transport him to safety if his vital signs indicated immediate danger. Medical teams stood ready with every known treatment for the types of injuries the Vorkath typically inflicted. Armed guards took positions at every entrance to the containment chamber. When everything was ready, Daewon rode the lift down to the containment level. His heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears, but he forced his breathing to remain steady. The doors opened with a soft hiss, and he stepped into the presence of death itself. The Vorkath stopped pacing the moment Daewon entered the chamber. Those burning eyes fixed on him with an intensity that seemed to pierce straight through to his soul. The creature's massive head tilted slightly, as if it was trying to understand what this small being was doing in its prison. Daewon did something that no previous researcher had tried. Instead of approaching the containment field with weapons or protective equipment, he simply sat down on the floor about 20 feet away from the barrier. He pulled out his datapad and began making notes, occasionally looking up to observe the creature's behavior. The Vorkath's reaction was immediate and unexpected. Instead of the rage-filled attack that had greeted other visitors, the creature seemed genuinely puzzled. It moved closer to the edge of the containment field and crouched down, bringing its massive head closer to Daewon's level. For several long minutes, human and alien simply studied each other. Daewon noted everything he could observe about the creature's posture, its breathing patterns, the way its eyes moved. The Vorkath seemed to be doing the same thing, tilting its head from side to side as if trying to see him from different angles. Fascinating, Daewon whispered into his recording device. Subject shows clear signs of curiosity rather than aggression. Previous reports may have been incomplete. The Vorkath's head snapped up at the sound of his voice. For a moment, Daewon thought he had made a fatal error. The creature's eyes blazed brighter, and its muscles tensed as if preparing to strike. But then something unexpected happened. The Vorkath made a sound. It was not a roar or a growl, but something almost like a questioning hum. The creature was trying to communicate. Daewon slowly reached into his equipment pack and pulled out a simple metal stylus. Moving very carefully, he used it to scratch a basic pattern into the metal floor. 3 parallel lines followed by 2 parallel lines. The Vorkath watched intently as he worked. When Daewon finished and looked up, the creature extended one massive claw and made its own marks on the containment barrier. The energy field sparked and crackled but held firm. The pattern the Vorkath had traced was clear. 5 parallel lines. It can count, Daewon breathed. It understood what I was showing it and responded appropriately. He tried another pattern, this time drawing a simple circle. The Vorkath studied it for a moment, then traced its own circle in the air with its claw. When Daewon drew a triangle, the creature responded with a 3-sided figure of its own. The breakthrough came when Daewon drew a simple representation of the chamber they were in, a rectangle, with 2 smaller rectangles inside representing himself and the Vorkath. The creature studied this for a long time, its head moving back and forth as if it was processing complex information. Then the Vorkath began making its own drawing on the barrier. The pattern was much more complex than anything Daewon had created. It showed not just the chamber, but seemed to represent the entire facility, with lines connecting different areas. At certain points in the drawing, the creature made symbols that looked almost like writing. "Commander Borak," Daewon spoke into his communicator, never taking his eyes off the creature. "I think this thing is trying to show me a map of this place. It knows the layout of the facility." The reply came back filled with static and disbelief. "That is impossible, human. The creature has been contained since its capture. It could not have learned the facility layout." But as Daewon studied the drawing more carefully, he realized it was not just accurate, it was incredibly detailed. The Vorkath had somehow mapped out areas of the facility that even he had not seen. More disturbing still, some of the symbols the creature had drawn seemed to indicate structural weaknesses in the containment system. The Vorkath was not just intelligent, it had been planning. As this realization sank in, the creature looked directly at Daewon and made another sound. This time it was unmistakably a laugh, deep and rumbling, but definitely expressing amusement. The Vorkath had been playing with its captors all along, pretending to be a mindless beast while secretly studying everything around it. Daewon felt a chill run down his spine, but also a growing excitement. He was not dealing with a monster. He was dealing with a highly intelligent being that had been grossly misunderstood by every species that had encountered it. The question was, what did it really want? Daewon spent the next 12 hours in the containment chamber, returning only for brief breaks to eat and rest. Each time he came back, the Vorkath seemed to be waiting for him, positioned near the barrier as if it had been watching the entrance. The creature no longer paced restlessly around its prison. Instead, it focused its attention entirely on the small human who had shown it something no other being had offered. Genuine curiosity without fear. The communication system they had developed was growing more complex by the hour. What had started as simple counting and basic shapes had evolved into something approaching a primitive language. The Vorkath would scratch patterns on the energy barrier using its claws, while Daewon responded with marks on the metal floor using various tools from his equipment pack. The progression is remarkable. Daewon spoke into his recording device while the creature watched him intently. Subject demonstrates not only intelligence but active learning. It adapts to new symbol systems within minutes and seems to understand abstract concepts. Commander Borak observed from the security station above, his scarred face showing disbelief at what he was witnessing. Never in his 40 years of managing dangerous specimens had he seen anything like this. The most feared predator in known space was engaged in what could only be described as a friendly conversation with a human researcher. Tae-hyun Lee had joined the observation team, monitoring Daewon's vital signs and maintaining constant communication with the surface. "His stress levels are actually decreasing," he reported to Ambassador So-jin Park through the secure channel. "Whatever that thing is doing, it's not threatening him anymore." On the 13th hour, the breakthrough came. Daewon had been trying to explain the concept of different species, drawing simple figures to represent humans, the bear-like Ursak, and the crystalline beings. The Vorkath had watched these drawings with growing interest, occasionally adding its own marks to clarify or ask questions. Then the creature began drawing something completely different. The patterns were more intricate than anything it had shown before, filled with flowing lines and geometric shapes that seemed to tell a story. As Daewon watched, he realized the Vorkath was showing him images from its own memory. The first drawing showed creatures that looked similar to the Vorkath, but smaller and more refined. They stood upright in groups, their claws engaged in delicate work rather than destruction. Around them were structures that could only be cities, with elegant spires and complex architectural details that spoke of advanced civilization. "It's showing me its people," Daewon whispered. "These aren't mindless beasts. They were a civilization." The next series of drawings showed the same cities, but something had gone wrong. The elegant spires were crumbling and the refined creatures were changing, becoming larger and more savage. The Vorkath drew symbols that seemed to represent sickness or poison spreading through the population. As the story continued, Daewon saw the civilization falling apart. The drawing showed the transformed creatures fleeing their dying cities, becoming the predatory beings that now terrorized space lanes. But there was something else in the images, symbols that the Vorkath drew with what appeared to be anger. "Commander Borak," Daewon called up to the observation deck. I need you to run these symbols through the translation database. I think the creature is trying to tell me who was responsible for what happened to its people. The analysis took several minutes, during which the Vorkath waited patiently, occasionally adding new details to its drawings. When the results came back, Commander Borak's voice was filled with shock. Human, those symbols. They match records from the early Council archives. Species designations from over 800 years ago. Which species? Daewon asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Multiple species. Several of the founding Council members appear in these symbols. The hegemony worlds, the crystalline collective, others. But human, these records show those species as having formed a research consortium during that time period. The implications hit Daewon like a physical blow. The Vorkath was not just telling him about the fall of its civilization, it was identifying the cause. The founding members of the Interstellar Council had been involved in whatever had destroyed the Vorkath's people. The creature seemed to sense Daewon's understanding. It moved closer to the barrier and began drawing again, this time showing what appeared to be laboratories and research facilities. The symbols for the Council species appeared repeatedly in these new images, always in connection with facilities that seemed to be conducting experiments. They were test subjects, Daewon realized. The Council species were experimenting on the Vorkath civilization. The creature made a sound that Daewon had learned to recognize as agreement. Then it began the most complex drawing yet, showing what appeared to be a great exodus. The transformed Vorkath were fleeing their homeworld, scattering across the galaxy. But they were not fleeing randomly. The drawing showed them following specific patterns, seeking something. What are you looking for? Daewon asked, pointing to the fleeing figures in the drawing. The Vorkath's response was immediate and clear. It drew symbols that Daewon had learned meant home and healing, but combined them in a way that suggested something more complex. The creature was not just seeking a place to live. It was seeking a way to undo what had been done to its people. Over the next several hours, the communication became more sophisticated. The Vorkath taught Daewon elements of its original language, a complex system that combined visual symbols with specific claw movements and even subtle changes in posture. In return, Daewon shared human writing and basic spoken words, which the creature seemed to find fascinating. The most surprising discovery came when Daewon began explaining human history. The Vorkath showed intense interest in humanity's struggles with disease, war, and environmental destruction. It seemed particularly focused on how humans had overcome these challenges, often through cooperation and innovation rather than pure force. You find us interesting because we survived our own near extinction, Daewon said, making the symbols for survival and cooperation. You think we might understand what your people went through. The Vorkath's response was a complex gesture that combined agreement with something that looked almost like hope. For the first time since the communication had begun, the creature's burning eyes seemed less filled with ancient rage and more filled with possibility. But then alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and Commander Borak's voice echoed through the chamber speakers. Emergency evacuation protocols initiated. Containment breach in Sector 7. The Vorkath's head snapped up and its posture changed instantly from relaxed communication to alert readiness. It made rapid gestures to Daewon, symbols that clearly meant danger and warning. It's not this creature, Daewon realized with growing horror. There's another one. The Vorkath is trying to warn us. The sound that echoed through the facility then was unlike anything Daewon had ever heard. It was a roar of pure rage that seemed to shake the very foundations of the underground complex. Somewhere in the facility, another Vorkath had broken free, and it was not interested in communication. The creature in the containment field looked directly at Daewon and made a series of urgent gestures. The meaning was clear. The escaped Vorkath was coming this way, and it would kill everything in its path. But then the contained Vorkath did something that shocked everyone watching. It began making different symbols on the barrier, patterns that seemed to be directed not at Daewon, but toward the approaching threat. It was calling out to its fellow creature, trying to communicate across the facility. It's trying to stop the other one, Tae-hyun observed from the security station. It's actually trying to protect us. The roaring grew closer, accompanied by the sounds of destruction as the escaped Vorkath tore through the facility's defenses. Emergency teams were evacuating the upper levels, but Daewon remained in the containment chamber, unwilling to abandon the communication breakthrough he had achieved. The Vorkath in the containment field made one final gesture to Day One, a complex symbol that combined the meanings of trust, alliance, and desperate need. Then it did something that no one had expected. It began weakening its own containment barrier from the inside, preparing to break free. But instead of preparing to attack, it positioned itself between Day One and the approaching danger. The most feared predator in the galaxy was preparing to fight to protect a human researcher who had shown it kindness and understanding. The facility shook as something massive struck the outer doors of the containment chamber. The other Vorkath had found them. The emergency lasted 6 hours. By the time security teams managed to contain the second Vorkath, half of the research facility lay in ruins. The creature had torn through reinforced walls like paper and destroyed equipment worth millions of credits before finally being subdued by massive amounts of sedatives and energy weapons. But the most remarkable part of the entire incident was what had not happened in the main containment chamber. When the escaped Vorkath had finally broken through the outer doors, it had been met not by a helpless human researcher, but by another Vorkath standing protectively in front of Day One. The two creatures had communicated in a rapid series of roars and claw gestures before the escaped one had backed down and allowed itself to be recaptured. Commander Borak stood in the wreckage of his facility, shaking his massive head in disbelief. In 40 years of managing dangerous specimens, I have never seen anything like this. One Vorkath protecting a member of another species from another Vorkath. It should be impossible. Day One was exhausted but excited as he compiled his reports. The communication breakthrough had been beyond anything he had hoped for. Not only had he established meaningful contact with one of the galaxy's most feared creatures, but he had learned the truth about their origins and their connection to the AI Council's founding members. Ambassador, Park needs to see this immediately, he told Taehyun as they rode the elevator back to the surface. What I learned down there could change everything we know about galactic history. So-Jin Park was waiting for them at the embassy, along with several other human staff members who had been monitoring the emergency broadcasts. Her face showed relief when she saw Day One walking in unharmed, but that relief quickly changed to concern when she saw the thick stack of data files he was carrying. "Tell me you have good news," she said. "The Council is demanding a full report in 2 hours, and they do not sound happy about the facility damage." Day One spread his notes and recordings across the conference table. "I have better than good news. I have proof that the Vorkath are not the mindless monsters everyone believes them to be. They were once an advanced civilization, and their transformation into predators was caused by experiments conducted by the Council's founding species." The room fell silent. So-Jin stared at the evidence Day One had gathered. Recorded communications, symbolic drawings, and behavioral analysis that painted a completely different picture of the Vorkath than anything in official records. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" she asked quietly. "I spent 18 hours in direct communication with the creature," Day One replied. "It told me the story of its people through drawings and symbols. The translation database confirmed that the species mentioned in its account match historical records of a research consortium formed by early council members." Taehyun pulled up security footage from the containment chamber on his datapad. "I can confirm the communication was real. The creature showed clear signs of intelligence and emotional response. When the second Vorkath broke loose, it actually protected Day One from attack." So Jin reviewed the evidence for over an hour before making her decision. "We present this to the Council exactly as it happened. If humanity is going to succeed or fail in this challenge, it will be based on the truth of what you discovered." The Council chambers were packed when So-Jin arrived to make her report. Word of the facility incident had spread quickly, and representatives from dozens of species had come to witness what many expected to be humanity's public failure and subsequent expulsion from Council space. Council leader. Vorthak's yellow eyes fixed on So-Jin as she approached the speaking platform. "Ambassador Park, we understand there was significant damage to our research facility. I trust you have an explanation for this destruction." So-Jin activated the chamber's display system and began presenting Day One's findings. She showed the recordings of the communication sessions, the symbolic drawings that told the story of the Vorkath civilization, and the analysis that connected their downfall to early council activities. The reaction was immediate and hostile. Ambassador Quilneth rose from her crystalline platform, her body flashing angry red colors. "This is preposterous. You expect us to believe that humans succeeded in communicating with a Vorkath, when species with thousands of years more experience have failed?" "The evidence speaks for itself," Sojin replied calmly. Dr. Kim spent 18 hours in direct communication with the creature. The recordings clearly show intelligent responses and complex information exchange. "Recordings can be falsified," declared Ambassador Thorne from the Klaxi delegation. "This appears to be nothing more than an elaborate deception designed to avoid admitting failure." Council Leader Vorthak studied the data with obvious skepticism. "Even if we accept that some form of communication occurred, your claims about historical council activities are extremely serious accusations. You are suggesting that our founding species committed acts of genocide against the Vorkath civilization." "I am reporting what the creature communicated to Dr. Kim," Sojin answered. "The symbols it used match historical records in your own archives. The timeline corresponds to documented research activities by the species it identified." A murmur of anger ran through the assembled representatives. Many of them belonged to the species that had been mentioned in the Vorkath's account. They saw Sojin's presentation not as a scientific breakthrough, but as an attack on their ancestors and their legitimacy as council leaders. Ambassador Quilneth's crystalline form shifted to deep purple, indicating rage. "This human dares to stand before us and accuse our founders of creating the very monsters that have terrorized the galaxy for centuries. It is an insult to every civilized being in this chamber. Furthermore," added another representative, "even if some primitive communication occurred, it proves nothing about human worthiness for council membership. Any species can make sounds and scratches that another species might interpret as meaningful." Council Leader Vorthak raised his hand for silence. "The human claims are extraordinary and require extraordinary proof. We cannot accept recordings and drawings as sufficient evidence for such serious accusations." Sojin felt the weight of her species' future pressing down on her. The council had clearly decided to reject the evidence regardless of its validity. They were looking for any excuse to dismiss humanity's achievement and maintain their established order. "What proof would the council require?" she asked. Vorthak exchanged glances with several other council leaders before responding. "If this communication is genuine, then it should be repeatable under controlled conditions. We demand a live demonstration before the full council assembly." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. A live demonstration meant bringing the Vorkath into the council chambers themselves, removing it from containment and placing it in direct contact with representatives from dozens of species. It was potentially suicidal for everyone present. "You are asking us to bring one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators into this chamber," Sojin said. "The risk to everyone present would be enormous." "Indeed," Vorthak replied with what might have been a smile. "But if your claims about communication and control are true, then there should be no danger. Unless, of course, you are not as confident in your achievement as you claim to be." Sojin realized she was trapped. The council was offering her an impossible choice: demonstrate the communication breakthrough in the most dangerous possible circumstances, or admit that humanity's claims were false and accept permanent exile from galactic society. Ambassador Quilneth added her own challenge. "We propose that this demonstration take place tomorrow at the full council session. Every member species will be present to witness either humanity's greatest triumph or its final failure." The chamber fell silent as everyone waited for Sojin's response. She thought about Day One, who had risked his life to achieve this breakthrough. She thought about the Vorkath in containment, whose trust they had somehow earned. Most of all, she thought about the billions of humans on Earth who were depending on her to secure their place in the galactic community. "We accept your challenge," she said finally. "Dr. Kim will demonstrate communication with the Vorkath before the full council tomorrow." The decision was made. In less than 24 hours, humanity would either prove its worthiness to join galactic civilization or face catastrophic failure in front of representatives from every major species in known space. As the council session ended, Sojin noticed something troubling. Many of the representatives were not just skeptical about humanity's claims. They seemed actively hostile, as if they wanted the demonstration to fail regardless of the consequences. She began to wonder if the real test was not whether humans could communicate with the Vorkath, but whether they could survive the political forces that wanted to see them destroyed. The next day would determine not just humanity's future, but possibly the fate of every species that had ever been wronged by the Council's founding members. The truth about the Vorkath was just the beginning of secrets that some powerful beings would kill to keep hidden. The Council chambers had never hosted anything like this before. Emergency medical teams lined the walls, ready to treat injuries that could range from deep claw wounds to complete dismemberment. Energy barrier generators hummed at full power, creating multiple layers of protection between the speaking platform and the observation areas. Armed security forces from a dozen different species stood ready, with weapons capable of stopping a rampaging Vorkath, though everyone knew such weapons had limited effectiveness against the creatures. Day One stood on the central platform, wearing simple research clothing and carrying only basic communication tools. He had refused all offers of protective armor or weapons, knowing that any sign of aggression might trigger the Vorkath's predatory instincts. His hands were steady, but Sojin could see the tension in his shoulders as he prepared for what might be the last few minutes of his life. Ambassador Sojin Park watched from the human delegation area, her heart pounding as transport containers were wheeled into the chamber. The Vorkath had been sedated for transport, but the drugs were already wearing off. Through the reinforced viewing ports, she could see the creature beginning to stir, its massive form shifting restlessly in the confined space. Council leader Vorthak addressed the assembled representatives, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "We are gathered today to witness an unprecedented demonstration. The human delegation claims to have established meaningful communication with a Vorkath, one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. This demonstration will either validate their claims or expose them as elaborate deception." The murmur that ran through the chamber was filled with fear and anticipation. Representatives from 47 different species had come to witness this event. Many had positioned themselves as far from the central platform as possible, while others had retreated to heavily shielded observation booths. Ambassador Quilneth spoke from her crystalline platform, her body flashing colors that indicated both skepticism and barely contained hostility. "Let the record show that the Crystalline Collective considers this demonstration to be unnecessarily dangerous. If the human claims prove false, the resulting casualties will be substantial. The risk is noted and accepted," Sojin replied formally. "Dr. Kim has volunteered for this demonstration with full knowledge of the potential consequences." The transport container was moved to the center of the chamber and positioned 30 feet from where Daewon stood waiting. Multiple layers of energy barriers separated the container from the observation areas, but there would be no barriers between Daewon and the creature once it was released. Commander Borak's voice echoed through the chamber as he prepared to open the container. "All personnel are advised that emergency evacuation protocols are in effect. If the creature shows signs of aggressive behavior, the chamber will be sealed and flooded with stun gas." Daewon held up his hand to stop the procedure. "No stun gas," he said clearly. "If we use any form of force or restraint, we will destroy any possibility of communication. The creature must be allowed to act freely, or this demonstration will prove nothing." Several representatives began protesting immediately, but Council leader Vorthak silenced them with a gesture. "The human has made his terms clear. If he wishes to face the creature without protection, that is his choice." The container began to open with a series of mechanical clicks and hisses. Steam vented from the sides as the internal atmosphere equalized with the chamber environment. Through the widening gap, everyone could see the dark bulk of the Vorkath stirring to full consciousness. The creature emerged slowly, its massive form unfolding to its full 15-foot height. Its scales seemed to absorb the chamber lighting, making it appear as a living shadow with burning eyes. Those eyes swept across the assembled representatives, causing many to shrink back in terror, before finally settling on the small human figure standing alone on the platform. For a long moment, nothing happened. The Vorkath stood motionless, its head tilted slightly as if trying to remember something important. Then recognition dawned in those ancient eyes, and the creature's posture changed from alert wariness to something that might have been relief. Daewon began the communication ritual they had developed, scratching simple patterns on the platform floor with a metal stylus. 3 parallel lines followed by 2 parallel lines, the basic counting sequence that had started their first conversation. The Vorkath responded immediately, extending one massive claw to trace 5 parallel lines in the air. The gesture was precise and deliberate, showing clear understanding of the mathematical concept being presented. Gasps of amazement echoed through the chamber. Many of the assembled representatives had never seen a Vorkath do anything other than attack or retreat. This display of controlled, intelligent behavior was unlike anything in the official records, but Daewon was just getting started. He moved on to more complex symbols, drawing geometric shapes and pointing to various objects around the chamber. The Vorkath followed each demonstration with keen interest, responding with its own gestures and vocalizations that showed clear comprehension. "Impossible," whispered Ambassador Thorne from the insectoid delegation. "That creature is displaying cognitive abilities equivalent to a highly educated sentient being." The real breakthrough came when Daewon began drawing the symbols that represented the Vorkath's history. He scratched the patterns that showed the original Vorkath civilization, the elegant cities, and the advanced society they had once been. The creature's reaction was immediate and powerful. The Vorkath made a sound that started as a low hum and built into something that was clearly a song of mourning. Its massive form seemed to shrink as ancient grief filled its voice, and it began adding its own drawings to the platform surface, tracing memories of a lost world with delicate precision. Then Daewon drew the symbols that represented the council species who had been involved in the Vorkath's downfall. The creature's song changed to something darker, filled with anger and betrayal. It pointed directly at the observation areas where representatives of those species were sitting, making vocalizations that needed no translation to understand. Ambassador Quilnith rose from her platform, her crystalline form flashing angry red. "This is outrageous. The creature is making accusations based on false information provided by the humans." But the Vorkath was not finished. It began drawing new symbols more complex than any it had shown before. These were not simple pictures or mathematical concepts. They were detailed technical diagrams, showing what appeared to be advanced biotechnology and medical procedures. Daewon studied the drawings with growing amazement. "It's showing us scientific knowledge," he announced to the chamber. Technical information from its civilization's archives. The creature continued drawing, adding details that showed genetic manipulation techniques, advanced healing technologies, and scientific principles that were clearly beyond current galactic knowledge. It was offering the assembled species a gift of incredible value, sharing the preserved knowledge of its lost civilization. But then something went wrong. The Vorkath suddenly stopped drawing and stood upright, its head turning toward one of the observation booths. Its eyes blazed brighter, and a growl of pure rage began building in its throat. In the booth where the creature was looking, Ambassador Quilnith was holding what appeared to be a small device. The device was emitting a faint energy signature that was invisible to most species, but the Vorkath could clearly sense it. "She's using some kind of neural disruptor," Taehyun's voice crackled through Daewon's communicator. "The energy signature is designed to cause pain and confusion in Vorkath nervous systems." The creature's rage was building rapidly. It had recognized the device as similar to the weapons that had been used against its people during the original experiments. The careful communication that Daewon had established was being deliberately sabotaged. "Turn off the device," Daewon shouted toward the observation booth. "You're causing it pain." Ambassador Quilnith's crystalline form flashed with defiant colors. "We will not be intimidated by this monster's theatrics. This creature is clearly unstable and dangerous." The Vorkath took a step toward the observation areas, its claws extended and its muscles tensed for attack. The careful trust that had been built over hours of patient communication was crumbling under the assault of the neural disruptor. But Daewon did something that no one expected. Instead of retreating to safety, he stepped directly between the enraged Vorkath and the observation booths. He spread his arms wide and began making the symbols for peace and trust, drawing them rapidly on the platform while speaking in the few Vorkath words he had learned. The creature paused, its burning eyes looking down at the small human who was willing to risk his life to protect the very beings who were torturing it. For a moment, the chamber balanced on the edge of catastrophe. Then the Vorkath made its choice. Instead of attacking the source of its pain, it gently pushed Daewon aside and began drawing one final symbol on the platform. The symbol was complex and beautiful, combining elements that meant protection, alliance, and hope. The creature was choosing trust over revenge, even in the face of deliberate cruelty. The silence in the council chambers was deafening. The Vorkath stood motionless beside Daewon, its massive form radiating calm despite the neural disruptor that was still causing it pain. The creature had made its choice, and that choice had shaken every representative present to their core. Council Leader Vorthak was the first to break the silence. "Ambassador Quilneth, you will deactivate that device immediately." The crystalline being's form flashed angry colors, but she complied. The moment the neural disruptor was turned off, the Vorkath's posture relaxed visibly. It looked down at Day One and made a soft sound that was clearly one of gratitude. "The demonstration has exceeded all expectations," Vorthak continued, his yellow eyes studying the creature with new understanding. "The evidence of intelligence and communication ability is undeniable." But Day One was not finished. He knelt beside the Vorkath and pointed to the complex symbol it had drawn on the platform. "There's something else," he announced to the chamber. "The creature wants to share something important with all of you." The Vorkath began a new series of gestures, more elaborate than any it had shown before. It moved its claws in flowing patterns while making musical sounds that seemed to carry deep meaning. As it gestured, images began forming in the air above the platform. At first, the assembled representatives thought they were seeing some kind of holographic technology, but the images were too clear, too detailed, and there was no technological device creating them. The Vorkath was somehow projecting memories directly into the visible spectrum through a form of advanced telepathy. The images showed the Vorkath homeworld as it had been centuries ago. Beautiful cities with spires that seemed to grow from the ground like crystalline trees, gardens that floated in the air supported by technology that bent gravity itself, and everywhere the original Vorkath people, elegant beings who moved with grace and purpose. "This is incredible," whispered one of the human staff members. "It's showing us actual memories of their civilization." The images changed, showing the Vorkath people working in laboratories and research facilities. Their technology was clearly far advanced beyond anything the current council possessed. They had mastered genetic engineering, energy manipulation, and what appeared to be dimensional travel. But then the memories turned dark. New figures appeared in the images, beings that were clearly recognizable as early versions of current council species. The hegemony's reptilian ancestors, primitive versions of the crystalline collective, and others. These early council species were portrayed as crude and aggressive, carrying weapons instead of research tools. The memory images showed the council species arriving at the Vorkath homeworld not as friends or trading partners, but as conquerors. They established research facilities and began capturing Vorkath citizens for experimentation. Ambassador Thorne from the insectoid delegation buzzed his wings in agitation. "These images could be fabricated. We have only this creature's word that these events occurred as shown." But the Vorkath was not finished. It gestured toward the council's main archives, making symbols that clearly indicated it wanted access to historical records. When technicians brought up the archive system on the chamber's main display, the creature began pointing to specific entries. The correlation was undeniable. Every event shown in the memory images matched entries in the council's own historical database. The research consortium formed by the founding species, the establishment of facilities in what was then called the Outer Rim territories, and the sudden disappearance of an advanced civilization that had once controlled that region of space. Council Leader Vorthak studied the archives with growing unease. These records have been classified for 800 years. How could this creature know their contents? The Vorkath's response was to project more memory images, these showing the experiments that had been conducted on its people. The council species had been trying to understand and steal Vorkath biotechnology, particularly their ability to manipulate genetic structures and adapt to hostile environments, but the experiments had gone horribly wrong. Instead of gaining the Vorkath's abilities, the council species had created a plague that spread through the Vorkath population. The elegant, peaceful beings were transformed into the savage predators that now terrorized space lanes. The few who retained their intelligence were driven mad by the memories of what they had lost. The transformation was not natural evolution, Day One explained to the stunned assembly. It was the result of failed experiments conducted by your ancestors. The Vorkath became predators because they were made into predators. The implications were staggering. For 8 centuries, the galaxy had lived in fear of creatures that were actually the victims of the Council's own actions. Every attack, every death, every destroyed settlement could be traced back to the founding species' greed for Vorkath technology. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The Vorkath projected one final set of memory images, these showing hidden facilities that still existed throughout Council space. The creature somehow knew the locations of secret research installations, where the Council's founding species continued their experiments. There are other victims, Daewon realized as he studied the images, other species that have been experimented on and transformed. The Council has been doing this for centuries. The chamber erupted in angry voices as representatives from dozens of species began demanding explanations. Many began to understand why certain civilizations had mysteriously disappeared or why some regions of space were considered cursed and avoided. Ambassador, Quilneth's crystalline form had turned a sickly yellow, color that indicated deep shame. Even if these accusations were true, they concern events that occurred centuries ago. The current council cannot be held responsible for the actions of distant ancestors. The Vorkath's response was immediate and powerful. It projected images of recent activities, showing that the secret experiments had never stopped. Current council members were still operating the hidden facilities, still conducting illegal research on captured specimens from primitive worlds. This is happening now, Daewon announced. Not centuries ago. The council is still experimenting on sentient beings. The evidence was overwhelming. The Vorkath had somehow retained access to information networks that allowed it to monitor council activities across the galaxy. It had been gathering evidence of ongoing crimes while pretending to be a mindless beast. Council leader Vorthak's composure finally cracked. His yellow eyes blazed with anger, but it was not directed at the Vorkath or the humans. It was directed at his fellow council members who had been conducting illegal activities without his knowledge. Security teams will immediately investigate every facility shown in these images, he announced. Any council member found to be involved in unauthorized experimentation will face immediate expulsion and criminal prosecution. Several representatives began protesting, but their objections only confirmed their guilt. The Vorkath had exposed a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of galactic government, but the creature was not finished revealing its secrets. It began drawing new symbols on the platform, these showing technological diagrams that were clearly beyond current galactic science. It was offering to share the preserved knowledge of its civilization, including medical techniques that could potentially reverse the genetic damage done to its people. It's offering to help, Daewon translated. Despite everything that was done to its species, it wants to work with us to heal the damage and prevent future victims. The gesture was remarkable in its generosity. The Vorkath had every reason to seek revenge against the species that had destroyed its civilization. Instead, it was offering cooperation and forgiveness. So Jin Park stood up from the human delegation area, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. The Vorkath has demonstrated not only intelligence and communication ability, but also wisdom and mercy that many of our species could learn from. Humanity requests permission to work with this being in establishing a new research partnership. The vote that followed was not about humanity's membership in the Council. That question had been answered beyond any doubt. The vote was about whether the galactic community was ready to face the truth about its own history and work toward healing the wounds that had been inflicted on countless innocent species. When the final tally was announced, the result was unanimous. For the first time in Council history, every single member species had voted in favor of the same resolution. Humanity would not only be granted full Council membership, but Daewon would be appointed as the first director of interspecies rehabilitation, a new position created specifically to work with the Vorkath and other victim species. The Vorkath looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives, its ancient eyes showing something that had not been there before: hope. For the first time in 800 years, the galaxy's most feared predator believed that healing might be possible. 3 months had passed since the historic demonstration in the Council chambers. The galaxy was still adjusting to the revelations that had shaken the very foundations of interstellar civilization. Hidden research facilities had been shut down across dozens of star systems. Corrupt officials had been removed from power, and victim species that had been experimented on for centuries were finally receiving help. Daewon Kim stood in his new laboratory on Nexus Prime, watching through reinforced windows as the Vorkath worked alongside human and alien scientists. The creature had chosen to stay and help, rather than return to the scattered survivors of its species. Its name, they had learned, was something that translated roughly as Keeper of Memories, and it had appointed itself as the guardian of its civilization's lost knowledge. The laboratory was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Traditional research equipment worked alongside Vorkath biotechnology that seemed to grow rather than be built. Living walls pulsed with gentle light, providing both illumination and air purification. Tables and workbenches shifted shape as needed, adapting to whatever research was being conducted. "The healing chambers are ready for the first group," announced Dr. Minho Chen, one of the human researchers who had joined the project. He was studying readings from a device that looked more like a flower than a machine. "The Vorkath biotechnology is remarkable. It can reverse genetic damage that our best medical science considered permanent." The first patients were 3 Vorkath, who had been captured over the past century. Like the Keeper of Memories, they had retained enough intelligence to communicate, but their bodies bore the scars of the transformation that had been forced upon them. The healing process would be slow and difficult, but it offered hope that had not existed for 800 years. So Jin Park entered the laboratory, followed by Tai-Hyun Lee and several council representatives. Her role had expanded far beyond human ambassador. She now served as the director of interspecies relations, working to rebuild trust between species that had been damaged by centuries of hidden crimes. "The council has approved funding for 50 more research facilities," she announced. "Species across the galaxy are volunteering to host rehabilitation centers for victim populations." The Keeper of Memories looked up from its work, its burning eyes now showing warmth rather than ancient rage. It made a series of gestures that Daewon had learned to interpret as gratitude mixed with cautious optimism. "It says the response has exceeded all expectations," Daewon translated. "More species are coming forward to report suspicious disappearances and genetic anomalies in their populations. We may have hundreds of victim groups that need help." The scope of the conspiracy had been staggering. For 8 centuries, the Council's founding species had been conducting illegal experiments on primitive civilizations. Some had been transformed into predators like the Vorkath. Others had been altered in different ways, and many had simply been destroyed when the experiments failed. But the most remarkable discovery had been the resilience of the victim species. Many had survived in hidden enclaves, maintaining fragments of their original cultures and knowledge. The rehabilitation program was not just about healing genetic damage, but about restoring lost civilizations to their former glory. Ambassador Quilneth entered the laboratory, her crystalline form showing colors that indicated deep humility. She had become one of the strongest supporters of the rehabilitation program, working to atone for her species' involvement in the original crimes. "The Crystalline Collective has voted to share our entire historical database," she announced. "Every record, every classified document, everything that might help identify additional victim species. We hold nothing back." The Keeper of Memories responded with a complex gesture that combined forgiveness with acknowledgement of the sacrifice such transparency represented. Many council species were discovering dark secrets in their own histories, but they were choosing truth over comfortable lies. Taehyun monitored the laboratory security systems, though they were largely unnecessary now. Word of the rehabilitation program had spread throughout the galaxy, and species were volunteering to help rather than seeking to exploit the situation. The fear that had once surrounded the Vorkath had been replaced by respect and admiration. "Another group of survivors just arrived," he reported, this time from the Helix Nebula. "They appear to be descendants of a species that was transformed into energy beings against their will." Each new group brought different challenges and different knowledge. The rehabilitation program was becoming a repository of lost sciences and forgotten wisdom. Technologies that had been thought destroyed forever were being recovered and shared freely with all council species. The most surprising development had been the number of humans volunteering for the program. Earth had sent thousands of researchers, doctors, and engineers to work on rehabilitation projects. Humanity's natural empathy and problem-solving abilities made them ideal partners for species that had lost trust in galactic civilization. "We have received a communication from the Outer Rim territories," Sojin announced. "A group calling themselves the Free Vorkath has established a new settlement on their original homeworld. They are requesting assistance in rebuilding their cities." The Keeper of Memories stopped its work entirely, its massive form trembling with emotion. After 800 years of exile and transformation, some of its people were finally going home. Day-Wan approached the creature, carrying a data pad with the message details. They want you to come with the first aid mission. They say they need the Keeper of Memories to help them remember how to be themselves again. The Vorketh made a sound that was part song and part weeping. It reached out with one massive claw and gently touched Day-Wan's shoulder, a gesture that had become their symbol of friendship and trust. It wants to know if humans will come too, Day-Wan translated. It says its people need teachers who understand what it means to overcome impossible odds. So-Jin smiled, remembering the impossible challenge that had brought them to this moment. Tell the Keeper that humanity would be honored to help. The rehabilitation program had become more than just a medical and scientific effort. It had become a new model for how species could work together, sharing knowledge and resources to heal old wounds and build a better future. 6 months later, Day-Wan stood on the observation deck of a transport ship approaching the Vorkath homeworld. Beside him, the Keeper of Memories watched its ancestral planet grow larger in the viewscreen. The world still bore scars from the ancient catastrophe, but new cities were rising from the ruins. The first healing centers are fully operational, reported Dr. Min-Ho Chen. We have successfully reversed the genetic transformation in over 300 individuals. They are returning to their original forms and remembering their original personalities. The success rate had improved dramatically as they learned more about Vorkath biology and psychology. What had seemed like an impossible task was becoming routine, though each successful healing remained a celebration for everyone involved. Tae-hyun pointed to readings on his security console. 17 different species have sent support ships. This is the largest cooperative effort in recorded galactic history. The fleet surrounding the transport ship included vessels from across the galaxy. Former enemies were working side by side, united by a common purpose that transcended old prejudices and fears. The rehabilitation program had become a symbol of what galactic civilization could achieve when it worked together. As the transport ship entered the planet's atmosphere, Day-Wan could see the new cities taking shape below. They combined traditional Vorkath architecture with modern technology, creating something that honored the past while embracing the future. The Keeper of Memories made a sound of pure joy as it saw its homeworld restored. Then it turned to Day-Wan and made a gesture that the human had never seen before. When he asked for a translation, the creature's response made him smile. It says this is the symbol for new beginning, Day-Wan announced to his colleagues, and it wants to teach it to everyone. The landing ceremony was attended by representatives from every council species. As the Keeper of Memories stepped onto its homeworld for the first time in 8 centuries, it carried with it not just the memories of what had been lost, but the hope for what could be built. So-Jin Park stood with the human delegation, watching as former predators embraced their healed relatives and began the long process of rebuilding their civilization. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, from the impossible challenge in the council chambers to this moment of triumph and renewal. Ambassador Park called one of the young human researchers. The Keeper wants to know if you will help establish the first interspecies university here. It says humans have a gift for bringing different peoples together. So-Jin looked around at the mixed groups of humans, Vorkath, and other species working together to build a better galaxy. Tell the Keeper that humanity accepts with honor. The story had come full circle from fear and misunderstanding to cooperation and hope. The galaxy's most feared predators had become its greatest teachers, showing that even the deepest wounds could heal when approached with patience, understanding, and love.